Welcome to the library of Highclere Castle, or as usual, it's Downton Abbey, isn't it? And I'm sitting here with General Sir Andrew Gregory, Master Gunner of St James's Park, and looking marvellous.
Lady Carnarvon, what a pleasure to be here in this beautiful setting.
It's fun, isn't it? And I hope you and your wife Sally have enjoyed some very good parties here as well.
We've enjoyed some wonderful parties. The hospitality here, I can assure you, is second to none and above Downton Abbey standards.
It's very high, Clifford. Thank you so much for joining us here today. It's really spurred on by this history weekend that we're sharing over the 10th and 11th of October, and I hope we'll go on to an annual history festival. And I wanted to take us back to what it was like, what life was like in World War II, for the people who lived through it, for our parents and grandparents, and also thinking in terms of the generations who had not merely survived that, but had actually survived or not survived World War I. So what an extraordinary and challenging and tragic half a decade of a century it was.
It was.
And I know we have different challenges today, Andrew, but it's sort of thinking about what they actually lived through. And
so difficult. Less than 30 years from the end of one terrible conflict, there was another. And particularly women who'd lost husbands, sons, boyfriends, then saw the same thing happening again. I'd love to talk about that. I'd love to talk a little bit about my family and my regiment. And perhaps just before I do that, I better explain why I'm dressed up like this. So I have the honour, as you so rightly said, of being the Master Gunner St James's Park, the head of the Royal Regiment of Artillery, and the representative of our Captain General, Her Majesty the Queen. The post was established in 1678.
My goodness.
And I am the 30th.
Geordie's family only bought this house in 1679, so you're older than he is.
There we go, a year older. Very important. And I'm the 32nd person to hold the post. And our regiment was formally established on the 26th of May, 1716. So we're just over 300 years old as a regiment. But as the Master Gunner, I represent Her Majesty across the United Kingdom's Royal Regiment of Artillery and with our Commonwealth artilleries. And I know how proud my father would be because he was a gunner as well. And
may I just interrupt and say, my father at least did his military service in the Royal Artillery.
Lady Carnarvon. It gets better and better, I think, is the answer.
His own father was a general in the Royal Engineers and spanned those two world wars, but survived them. And anyway, my father had a colonel or godfather who was up to the Royal Artillery, so joined.
So the Royal Artillery and the Royal Engineers are like twin brothers. We were formed on the same day, and we have very similar ethoses and work very well together, but like twins, there's the occasional rivalry that goes on. So we very much talk to each other, but equally our matches and our competitions are as fiercely fought as any. So my father, these are his war medals. They're very special to me. He joined the army in 1936 and served out in India. He was mentioned in dispatches in Eritrea in North Africa. And then he landed on Sword Beach at about 9:30 on the 6th of June, 1944, the second wave to go ashore. And he was badly wounded that night and was shipped back to England and spent 2.5 years in hospital. And like so many of his generation, he never complained. And he died about 10 years ago, aged 93. But that generation got on and served. And my mother too served. She was in the Women's Royal Naval Service. These are her medals. And she had a very interesting war. She joined the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens, in 1940 and went to Dover Castle. And she was working down in the dockyards. And one night she was in the castle brushing her teeth and there was an almighty explosion. And she went, "Alison, you must be strong," and got on. And what had happened, a shell, because they were being shelled from across the channel, had hit the gasometer, which had exploded in the town.
Wow.
Later in the war, She was working for Admiral Sir Bertrand Ramsay in Southwark House and was in the operations room on D-Day morning, moving pieces on the map table as the ships went across the channel, one of which was carrying my father, though they didn't know each other. She then went across to France in September 1944 and was in Paris on VE Day.
Wow.
And a couple of days later, when Winston Churchill, who I know is involved in your history festival, came to Paris, she and 2 other Wrens were holding the white ensign and got a thumbs up from the great man. So my service today very much stems from my parents and previous generations, and it makes, though they're neither of them still with us, it would make them very proud to see me sitting talking to you about this and the work you do and your husband, the Earl, to make sure people don't forget what went on in those conflicts and the way people served this great nation of ours.
There was a very strong sense of service, which I certainly remember. It was drummed into me by my father through his father and so on, looking backwards. But what extraordinary people. Can I just ask you, where did your parents meet then?
So they met in the mid-50s.
I love romance.
No.
A little bit later.
My mother's brother was also in the Royal Artillery, and he had he got a military cross at Dunkirk and was evacuated from there, and then fought through North Africa and was badly wounded in Italy. He lost a leg in Italy, and he brought my parents together, and they were married in 1955, and were very happy.
How amazing. They are extraordinary stories. I know Geordie's father fought in Syria when he was 19 and then went up the east coast of Italy, which he said was the most miserable war, and managed to survive. And at the end, I think he was shot in the foot and he ended up coming out, obviously. And funny enough, I found a recording recently, and he'd also damaged something in his eye or something.
Right.
So it was, you learn funny things.
You do learn funny things, and I think so many of that generation, and sadly there are very few left indeed now, talked very little about it. I have spoken a number of times to a remarkable gentleman in my regiment, Captain Leslie Gosling, who was what was called a command post officer at the Battle of El Alamein, which is a major event for our regiment. El Alamein was the 23rd of October 1942. It started with a barrage of 880 guns, and in the first 6 hours 500,000 shells were fired to make sure as the infantry advanced the casualties should be less. Leslie Gosling is now a mere 104. His wife is 102, and Leslie has recorded a number of messages about his experiences at Alamein and during the rest of the war. And these these messages are very important, because I think we all need to remember the difficulties. You know, you were talking about your husband's father. People went through, because we must be very careful about ever finding ourselves in a conflict of that scale again.
I completely agree, and I often wonder, and I'm sure many of us do at the moment, what they would think of our current war, if you like, against a virus. And I was discussing that with Robert Harris, who's written a wonderful thriller called V2, where this extraordinary, horrendous bomb, you don't know where or when it's going to strike. So that's that sense of fear and dread, because you can't see and you don't know, and there's no rhyme or reason. And in many ways, for all the data we're being confronted with today, there seems a lack of rhyme or reason, and it's trying to understand and manage the fear and create a strategy in order to walk out of this rather than not. So I find the comparisons, I think, really useful. And at this particular history festival, we've got Winston Churchill, obviously sadly not the real one, but a very good not one, arriving, because I just think we'd all want to cheer him and
We
say,
will want to cheer him.
we need a way out somehow,
So,
which
Lady
is what
Carnarvon,
we can all make actually.
as you know, when I'm not wearing my uniform,
Yeah.
my day job is as the chief executive of a charity called
Yes.
SSAFA, Soldiers, Sailors, Airmen and Families Association. And we support those in the military, veterans and their families. And certainly what we've seen, quite apart from those we've supported from conflicts from the Second World War forward, including those who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, is during this COVID crisis and the restrictions and the lockdown, a lot of people are suffering from real isolation.
Yes.
And they are struggling. And they are finding their mental well-being is taking a turn for the worse. Others are finding that financial hardship is definitely kicking in. And I think both you and I would worry that it's going to get worse during the winter. So across the country, although it is obviously different to what happened when my mother and father served during the Second World War, this is something that threatens everybody. And the uncertainty that you so correctly described is difficult for people to live with. And being responsible is something they've all got to continue to do.
It is, and obviously we were going to do something here with your help on VE Day, and then we've managed to pass by that and sort of just whisper thank you, and the same with VJ Day. And we're now sitting in October, and I thought it is worthwhile stopping to stand and to pause, to say thank you, to create an actual event with real people, and then to use the weekend as well to raise some money, because I think never have charities been so needed, and yet never have their finances been so challenged. And I was sharing with you this, as usual, mad idea, which is to have an online competition, because for everybody to enjoy, because I think we're short of dreams and hope and horizons. So we've put an online competition on our website and I think on my blog, anywhere we can. You have to answer some difficult questions, about Highclere Castle and Downton Abbey effectively and World War II. There's only 3 very simple questions, A, B and C. And then you just send in your competition, and I hope $5, €5, £5, whatever you can manage, to one of the charities led by SSAFA, because just a little bit helps. And then I'm going to pick out some of the winners. Perhaps you might help me do that with all the different charities just before Christmas, so we can give people a Christmas present, which might be a ride in tiger moths, 2 tiger moths by Concorde pilot, which I thought was so amazing, if you want to do that, but it's yours. Or to come here and have a ride in the Rolls Royce, an afternoon tea, and just a few prizes, or dinner at the Ritz, experiences with people in real settings, something to look forward to. We've got a cruise kindly donated by Viking Cruises, beginning at Paris, so the city of dreams, and we need some dreams, going down the Seine, and then also covering the Normandy beaches. And every prize has got sort of a 2-year time limit on it, so I hope people will feel safer by the time they feel they can enjoy themselves and feel inspired to do a little bit of travelling or reading or joining or volunteering to help charities such as yourselves. So a little bit of fun, because I think I need it.
Lady Carnarvon, your energy is incredible. You produce a wonderful blog every Monday morning, which I read and enjoy. Yes, of course I do. Absolutely I do. You've been producing podcasts, you're running a history festival, and you're keeping this wonderful estate and house going along with your husband.
Well,
and that is a challenge. And then you find time to think of others. And I mean this genuinely. And to project that out and think of the charities who indeed are finding it's challenging. And it's probably going to get more challenging.
I think it is.
Next year, when the national financial situation is going to be difficult. And making sure we can continue our work in partnership with other charities, and the military charities work extremely closely together. So SSAFA, I talk regularly to the Royal British Legion, to Help for Heroes, to Combat Stress, to the Army Benevolent Fund.
Yes, all of whom have come here, and they've been a delight to work with. And in some ways, I sort of think of SSAFA because it's about a family. And that's sort of where I am with this particular history weekend and where we are now. Our behaviour, where we can go has been compromised. We've been asked to restrain ourselves, to make those sacrifices, and not to embrace all of our family. And I think SSAFA, it sits alongside helping families. So I think it's a really good collaboration. And coming out of the Second World War, I think our parents and grandparents must have prayed, have hoped, have fought for collaboration, for cooperation, for a new way of life after 2 world wars. And it's remembering that's what they fought for, not to win, but for a different way of life. So again, that's where we are.
They fought, I completely agree, they fought for their freedoms and not to be oppressed by regimes they didn't agree with. And I think it's very interesting at the moment because, of course, some of our freedoms are being taken away for the greater good, and I respect that. But that is a challenge for many people. And my parents' generation I have absolutely no doubt my mother and father would have obeyed to the letter what they were told to do. But we need to make sure that as we go forward, not only so we have freedoms, but also so that people's well-being is looked after, because it is going to be difficult. I think these next 6 months, long nights, short days, weather not so good. During the first period of this pandemic, we've enjoyed a pretty good summer, and it's going to be challenging for people. And certainly for SSAFA, the Armed Forces Charity, who are family focused. We're 135 years old. Our heritage was there for the families long before the welfare state and the National Health Service. We need to keep that in mind and remember those people who will find life very difficult.
Well, I hope this weekend helps spur people to find out a bit more about you. It's sharing your story with a slightly different audience, bringing people together. I know you very kindly organised some pipers, which is very exciting.
They're wonderful.
I love bagpipers.
They're wonderful.
Well, then you were telling me that they've got very broad accents, but I am partly Scottish. But
well, Lady Carnarvon, you should not have a problem. But I think your PA found some of it just quite testing. But
so funny.
19 Regiment Royal Artillery, their pipes and drums will be very proud to be here on the 10th of October.
Thank you. I'm so looking forward to seeing them, and perhaps we can share some of it again on November the 11th, going into that particular period. But I was fascinated because you kindly brought along some of your papers, and there's a very moving photograph, which again reminds...
So I need to explain. Firstly, this is my great-grandfather's sword. It's a general officer's sword, which when I'm required to be on parade with it, I'm very proud to wear. And I was particularly proud as Master Gunner to escort Her Majesty the Queen round in October 2017 when she reviewed the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery wearing my great-grandfather's sword. So in this document we have some family letters from over the years, and I think one that's particularly moving is a picture of my great-grandfather, whose sword this was, with his 3 sons. One, my grandfather, survived the First World War. He was, interestingly, the captain of HMS Lance, which on the 6th of August 1914 fired the very first British shot of the Great War. Wow. He sadly was lost at sea as a commodore of a convoy in January 1943. His 2 brothers, pictured here, Jim served out in the the Middle East. Charles was killed in April 1915. We have a letter from my grandfather to Jim. My dearest Jim, this is dated the 5th of November 1918. And it says, for you, the campaign is over, and goes on to talk as any father would talk to their son. Jim had been killed on the 28th of October. And so many families have such similar tales, and that is why your work, Lady Carnarvon, through your History Festival and many other activities, to value the armed forces and celebrate those who serve in them and their families is enormously appreciated.
And wasn't it lovely to find that the fifth Earl had also become involved in SSAFA, George's great-grandfather in the First World War? That was the most glorious coincidence, and I so appreciated Ash finding that out. It was great.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
Really, really cool.
Well, the links between your family and SSAFA, as you rightly say, have gone across a century. And the fact that your husband, the 8th Earl, is also a Vice President of SSAFA Hampshire is very special and very important to us.
Well, he's very honoured to be part of it and completely thrilled. And I wanted to thank you for coming today, because there is the tragic and challenging side of life which your and my parents and grandparents and lived through in particular. And yet they lived so that we could also enjoy life today. And we have enjoyed life, and we have had some fantastic cocktails and very good dinners, whilst also remembering them, which is, I think, what they would have wanted us to do. And I've started this new sort of series of talks, Andrew, where there's very famous TED Talks, obviously, which are very well known around the world. And Highclere now has its own little series, and I've called them Hen Talks. I have got some hens, which I love, but it's about history, entertainment and nature. And all those three things, to my mind, help us through such challenging times. And it is always such a delight to welcome you here. Thank you so much for coming today.
Lady Carnarvon, it's always a pleasure. Nothing surprises me about you. And the fact that you have another new initiative to inspire people and make people remember that this is a passing phase, and to stay true to themselves and look after each other. That is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.